One family controls more wealth than entire provinces in Canada. They own the stores where you shop, the banks where you save, and even the land beneath your feet. But here's what nobody talks about. This bloodline has been quietly building power for over 350 years, and most Canadians have no idea they exist. In the next few minutes, I'll reveal 3 secrets about this family that will completely change how you see Canada. Let me show you exactly how this happened. Canada looks like a land of equal opportunity. We're taught that anyone can make it big through hard work. But beneath this image lies a truth that goes back centuries. While most Canadian families worry about mortgages and grocery bills, one bloodline has been accumulating power since before Canada was even a country. They arrived in the 1600s when Quebec was just a French colony. Back then, they started with fur trading and land grants from the King of France. Generation after generation, they married strategically, invested wisely, and never lost their grip on power. Today, their wealth is estimated at over $50 billion, but the real number could be much higher because most of their assets are hidden in private companies. They don't appear on Forbes lists. They don't do interviews. They operate in complete silence. Now here's where things get really interesting. This family doesn't just own businesses. They own the infrastructure of Canadian life itself. Walk into a shopping mall in Montreal, Toronto, or Vancouver. There's a good chance they own it. Buy groceries at a major chain? They likely own shares in the distribution network. Need a mortgage? One of their financial institutions might be processing it. Here's the shocking part. They control approximately 15% of Canada's total commercial real estate. That's worth roughly $300 billion in assets. To put that in perspective, that's more than the entire GDP of countries like Finland or Portugal. But it gets deeper. Through a complex web of holding companies and trusts, they have stakes in media outlets, telecommunications, energy companies, and even pharmaceutical distributors. They've mastered the art of invisible ownership. Instead of putting their family name on everything, they use numbered companies and investment firms with boring names that nobody investigates. A researcher in Toronto spent 5 years tracing their holdings and gave up because the corporate structure was too complicated. The family's power grew explosively in the 1950s and 60s when Canada was booming. While regular families were buying their first homes, this bloodline was buying entire city blocks. They had connections in government that gave them advance notice of where new highways and developments would be built. They bought the land cheap and sold it for massive profits. But if you think that's crazy, wait until you hear this. The family doesn't just own property. They own water rights, mineral rights, and timber rights across millions of acres. Documents from the 1800s show that their ancestors secured land grants that are still valid today. In northern Quebec alone, they control forestry operations larger than some European countries. These timber rights generate millions annually, and most Canadians have never heard about it. Here's where it gets controversial. In the 1970s, when Canada was debating national resource ownership, this family quietly lobbied to protect private land rights. They spent millions on lawyers and political donations. The result? While Canada nationalized some resources, massive exceptions were carved out for historical property rights. Guess who benefited most? Public records show they donated to politicians on both sides, liberal and conservative. They didn't care who won elections because they had friends everywhere. But their real genius was understanding compound interest and generational wealth transfer. While most families lose wealth by the 3rd generation, this bloodline created ironclad trusts that cannot be broken. Each generation receives income from the trust but cannot sell the core assets. It's locked forever. Financial experts call this structure dynasty trusts, and they're designed to last hundreds of years. The family also pioneered tax strategies that are now used by billionaires worldwide. By spreading assets across multiple provinces and using corporate structures, they legally pay far less tax than ordinary Canadians. One investigation found that despite controlling billions, their effective tax rate was lower than a middle-class family in Vancouver. When reporters tried to investigate, they faced armies of lawyers threatening lawsuits. Most news organizations backed down because they couldn't afford the legal battle. This brings us to the most shocking discovery of all. This family has intermarried with other powerful Canadian dynasties, creating a web of bloodlines that controls even more. Through strategic marriages over generations, they're now connected to families that own major Canadian banks, national retail chains, and energy companies. It's not a conspiracy, it's just smart dynasty building. When you map out the family trees, you discover that about 20 families control roughly 40% of Canada's private wealth. And they're all connected through blood or marriage. Here's the evidence. Genealogy researchers discovered that board members of Canada's biggest companies share family connections going back generations. A bank CEO is cousins with a real estate mogul who married into a family that owns media companies. These aren't coincidences. They're the result of centuries of calculated relationship building. At private clubs in Toronto and Montreal, these families meet regularly. They vacation together. Their children attend the same elite schools and summer camps. But here's what really happens. They share information. Before major economic changes, they position their assets. Before new regulations, they restructure their companies. They're not breaking laws. They're just playing a game that ordinary Canadians don't even know exists. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, regular Canadians lost their savings. But research shows these families actually increased their wealth by buying distressed assets at rock-bottom prices. The original bloodline I mentioned, they're now connected to at least 15 other wealthy dynasties through marriage and business partnerships. Together, they form what some economists call Canada's invisible aristocracy. Unlike European nobles with titles, they operate without public recognition. They prefer it that way. The less attention, the better. This concentration of wealth affects every Canadian, even if you've never heard these family names. When a few families control so much real estate, housing prices rise for everyone else. When they own retail infrastructure, they influence what products reach your stores and at what prices. When they have stakes in media companies, they indirectly influence what stories get told. Some economists argue this is just capitalism working as designed. Successful families should be able to pass wealth to their children. But critics point out that this level of concentration creates a two-tier society. If you're born into these families, you start life with massive advantages, elite education, business connections, and inheritance. If you're born outside them, you're competing with one hand tied behind your back. The implications go beyond money. These families influence policy through donations, lobbying, and personal relationships with politicians. They don't need to bribe anyone. Their lawyers simply draft favorable legislation that politicians introduce. It's all legal and happens in plain sight, but nobody connects the dots. For young Canadians, this means the Canadian dream is more myth than reality. Social mobility data shows that Canada is becoming less equal over time. The gap between wealthy families and everyone else is widening. These dynasties can invest in opportunities that regular people never even hear about. Private equity deals, pre-IPO investments, and international ventures that require millions in starting capital. Before we wrap up, there's one final thing you need to know. The family I've been describing, they're not alone. Every major Canadian city has a similar bloodline controlling local wealth. Vancouver has Asian Canadian dynasties built on real estate and international trade. Calgary has oil families that go back to the 1940s. Toronto has old money families from banking and manufacturing. What's shocking is that most Canadians could live their entire lives without knowing these families exist. They've perfected the art of invisible power. But here's the twist. This isn't unique to Canada. Every wealthy nation has similar dynasties operating behind the scenes. The difference is that Canadians believe their country is more equal than it actually is. We pride ourselves on fairness, but the data tells a different story. So what can you do with this information? Understand that the game is rigged, but not in an illegal way, just in a way that heavily favors those born into the right families. Knowledge is power, and now you know what most Canadians don't.